Welcome to another episode of One Door at a Time, Concentric Educational Solutions podcast, where we talk about not just the issues of education and what's impacting our students, but also about solutions. And last year when we first started, it was really about telling the story of how did Concentric get started, and more importantly, why and who do we service. And we've been evolving, and I know that many of you missed us during the summertime, but we're back better than ever for school year 23-24. And one of the things I thought about over the break, it was really about how do we get more diverse in the topics that we cover and the guests and what we're experiencing. But then also, you know, life always throws you a curveball. You just can never predict things. And it's really by God's intervention and design about how do you grow and what is your purpose and what is your destiny in life. And this summer, or earlier in the spring, we had an opportunity and I was approached by an organization to help us grow. And it's ironic and it's interesting to say the least that Concentric started very honestly and humbly in 2010. In 2010, we got a grant from New School Venture Fund. And in that grant, it wasn't even a company. It was an idea about how do we place students at the center of everything that we do. And I remember on the first podcast, I talked about that, is that a lot of times schools are structured around adults and not around students. And we got to fundamentally change that. So we were doing that while I was the director of student support services. And we just got some interesting results. And the interesting results were nothing by great design or innovation. It was but just simply understanding what students needed, not from our perspective as adults, but from their perspective as students. And if you listen to students and you listen to them authentically and you listen to them with your heart, they will tell you what they need and you don't have to think about it. And from that simple concept, we got a very small startup grants from New School Venture Fund. And I was really proud of that in 2010 because we were the first African-American company to get a grant. And I had no idea where this was going to go. I didn't know if I was going to fall on my face. I didn't know if it was going to go all over the place. And we just started with 3 schools in Washington, D.C. And we started with the premise of conducting home visits. We had to find where students were, why they were not coming to school. And as I mentioned before many times over, it was really around the 2007 Benita Jax tragedy in Washington, D.C., where 4 students had gone missing for 6 months. Unfortunately, their bodies were found decomposing in an upstairs closet, and no one from a school had come to see why they were missing. And I mean, it was definitely a tragedy, but it sparked their death. This tragedy really sparked the interest of finding students. And we took that understanding and we just start knocking on doors. This was really before GPS, and we weren't sophisticated. We were putting out MapQuest and just zigzagging all across Washington, D.C. But from that beginning, we went from 3 schools, and then we slowly went to 10 schools, and we went from different districts. 14 years later, through a pandemic, we went from 20 employees down to 5, from home visits and mentoring to home visits, mentoring, tutoring, to now over 200 employees across so many different districts. And as we were going through that growth, people start taking notice, not because of anything that I was necessarily doing, but from the people on the ground, from our professional student advocates, the ones that are in the field every single day, meeting students where they are, taking them where they need to be. And as we're doing this work, people are paying attention, and hopefully, and if you hit things right in the world, you will bring back that karma. You will bring back that energy. And in I want to say in April, late March, early April, I got a phone call, and I thought it was a prank call, y'all, because I'm like, with a small Black company that is just knocking on doors. And I got a phone call, and the phone call was asking me about this work that we were doing, and would I be interested in just talking about what it would look like if we scaled and we got bigger. And so I indulged in the call. We had the conversation on the phone, and we decided to meet up. And we met up next to the office. We talk about the office all the time because that's usually where we shoot from, and we're on location now. And during that conversation, during the meeting, I had an opportunity not just to meet a person, but to meet the human, the person behind the title, the person behind the name, the person behind the organization, about who they really are. So I had the unbelievable pleasure of welcoming the founder, right, and general partner, right, New Markets Venture Partners, Mr. Mark Grovic, and he has gone from just person introduced that I was introduced to, and to a friend, a mentor, a very conscious person who has really believed in me, but also believed in the vision of Concentric. So I want to welcome Mark to One Door at a Time, and we're going to just really talk about your background, how you got into this space, and what I'm really interested in, if you can share it, is you have an unbelievable spirit, a consciousness of humanity that really transcends anything that I thought would exist in business. So I want all of you to help me welcome Mark. And Mark, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for the work that you do and for the opportunity to get involved with your company. What my firm does is finds the most inspiring, accomplished, visionary, impactful entrepreneurs, and then we have the pleasure of helping them grow and scale and provide resources and experience and network. So I feel super fortunate to have met you, and I'm very glad to be involved. By way of background, I grew up inner city Chicago, a single mom. She spent some time incarcerated at one point in time.
Oh, wow.
And she came out of the 70s, sort of little bit of a hippie generation. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up with values around love and acceptance, and then went off to Berkeley.
How was Chicago in the 70s, though? Talk about that. Because Chicago has gone through a lot of iterations. How was it in the 70s growing up?
Well, my particular point of view was through the lens of my mother was a paramedic. Wow. So she worked for the Chicago Fire Department, and she would go into Cabrini Green, Robert Taylor homes, and deliver babies and treat gunshot wounds. And I would, every third day, she was 24 hours, right? 24 on, 48 off. So I'd go have dinner at the firehouse. Oh, wow. And I grew up kind of in the union world. They struck under the Jane Byrne administration, and we're off in picket line. So I was a little kid walking the picket line with my mom. Pretty interesting kind of union view, and super complex. The firemen, largely white males, super sexist, super racist, but accepted my mom as one of the first female paramedics in the city of Chicago. Wow. And were the sweetest guys in the world, but they had some real blind spots in terms of the way that they viewed the world. So I grew up with it in kind of a complicated Chicago in the 70s. I went to public schools in Chicago, super integrated. I'm very fortunate to come from, the north side of Chicago was a little more affluent and a little more integrated. Okay. The south side was a little less affluent and more segregated. Okay. And so I was able to grow up in a neighborhood where people all kind of got along, and it was a beautiful foundation. And so I think that kind of represents the 70s view of Chicago, just from my perspective. I left Chicago when I was 17. I'd skipped a grade. I went off to college at Berkeley, and I never returned to live in Chicago after that. So I have not lived in Chicago for a long time, but still consider it home, and really like the values there, the kind of Midwest values. And then Berkeley reinforced a lot of those progressive values that my mother raised me with, and I studied labor economics. Oh, wow. So you can kind of see the academic and the family foundation kind of coming from an empowerment of people that were left behind or underserved or kind of less well off, thinking about how to sort of drive economic mobility. That was kind of what I majored in at Berkeley.
Was Berkeley the proverbial melting pot? Talk about your experiences that really fed and shaped you while you were at Berkeley.
Well, it's a good question because so you can think about, I went to the Chicago Public Schools, and it was pretty, my joke was I was in a gifted and talented program, and that meant you only got in a fight once a week instead of every day, right? And then I went to this pretty conservative Jesuit high school that was the best academic in the city, but I felt like a stranger in a strange land. It was mostly suburban kids who were affluent, and that's not the background I came from. And I sort of had a miss in high school where I saw kind of, the rich kids is not my people. And I try and raise my kids to make sure that, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and not to write off a whole group of people. So I had kind of a tough experience in high school and felt a little bit like a rebel. When I went to Berkeley, it was a place where everyone was encouraged to be their unique, crazy self. And so I was like super normal at Berkeley.
Okay.
I was like the normalest kid. I had fraternity friends, but I wasn't in a fraternity. I had hippie friends, but I wasn't a hippie. I had friends from Southern California that were in business school or trying to make a lot of money, but that wasn't really me. I wasn't the finance guy, right? And I had all these different groups of friends, international friends, really good group of international friends. And they would all come to my house and for a party, and they would all be different. And I felt proud to convene very different group of people, but I think that was one of Berkeley's strengths. Like you said, it was a melting pot of cultures where you were encouraged to be your authentic self. That was one of, I think, Berkeley's strengths.
So now you go through Berkeley.
Yep.
You come out. Where do you go next?
So I moved to New York.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I went into a mergers and acquisition firm. I was off to make my fortune.
Okay.
And it was actually the best international law firm in the country, and I went in the M&A group, and I wanted to do international work. For some reason, that attracted me. And what I ended up majoring in this labor economics was a lot of developing countries at Berkeley. So I went off to this international law firm, and I thought I was going to be an international lawyer, even though I didn't know what that meant.
Absolutely.
And then I went to Georgetown Law School.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah. So at Georgetown Law School, I mean, there's so many stories to tell about that experience. One really formative one was there was a fairly kooky Washington Post columnist who was a professor there named Coleman McCarthy.
Okay.
And he was famous at this point in time for being a pacifist. And he taught a class called Peace Studies. And he started out Gandhi, King, Christ, some of the philosophy around pacifism. And then we handled issues like capital punishment or abortion or different sort of conflicts, right? And so that was a pretty good class at Georgetown. But what was more formative is he had a foundation for teaching peace that gave a grant to go and teach. So I thought that was a really neat thing to try and pursue. So I got a grant to go teach in the DC public schools, and I taught peace studies. And it started what turned into a 22-year career as a professor. I taught at Howard University, and then ultimately for 18 years at the University of Maryland. So in Georgetown, I became a professor, teacher, and then I got a Ford Foundation fellowship to go to Latin America and work with micro-lending institutions. And these institutions were initially not-for-profits, and they transitioned to for-profits.
Okay.
So they could scale. So another really formative idea, right? They were doing great work lending to women solidarity groups.
Okay.
They had a 99% repayment rate, and these very poor groups of women were able to take these loans and grow their businesses.
So you're actually in Latin America
Yeah,
doing
so I went
this?
to Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador for a semester during law school, and I got a Ford Foundation grant. And when I was down there, I saw the power, and they transformed from not-for-profits into for-profits, and they raised money to scale. So you could see how this is another seed, right?
Okay.
In my philosophy and what work I wanted to do. And these banks went from not-for-profit to for-profit. There was one called Banco Sol I worked with in particular that was sort of the poster child for this. And they went public in Bolivia.
Okay.
They did a $100 million bond offering, and they had a 99% repayment rate from these women who were thriving based on these microloans. And this bank was making a 32% return for its shareholders. And
Wow.
so I started to see the power of the market and financial instruments to drive impact at scale. And that was an experience I had while I was at Georgetown. And then finally, super formative, before I even graduated, I was working full time, and I ended up going to night school for my last year because I had a full-time role with the Calvert Group in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay, what is it?
Calvert Group is the leader in socially responsible investing in the country. And I was able to work right for the CEO, Wayne Silby, who would be a great person to have on this podcast, by the way. So he started the social responsible investment movement in the 70s.
Wow.
And he's got this fantastic story. He went to Georgetown as well. He started a company, a mutual fund, one of the first mutual funds, and he went to different banks, and they had SBA guaranteed loans.
Okay.
And he took the guaranteed piece that was giving about 700 basis points more yield than a CD. So a CD at this point was giving like 2%, and the SBA guaranteed piece from this was given 9 or 10%. And he went and bought these up and gave this yield to the consumer. Amazing. He was an amazing entrepreneur. By the time he was 30, he had $1 billion under management.
By the time he was 30?
Yeah. And then he said, so now what do I do with my life? And he went off and went to a couple conferences that changed his view of money and said, for the rest of my life, I'm going to make sure that all the investments that Calvert does are in socially responsible impact. And it started with a screening: no alcohol, no tobacco, no firearms. And they screened out the sin stocks, and they raised this mutual fund, which is one of the leading. And then Wayne went on the circuit talking about how capital and capitalism should be used for positive things. And when they hired me, they were doing these direct private equity investments, kind of like we've done with you, right? Not in a public company, which was the main application of all these billions of dollars. But then they had this little pool of capital, and we'd go off and we invest in entrepreneurs like yourself, women minority-owned businesses, environmental technology, healthcare, and education. And even as a student, it was such a nascent program and small that I ran that program. I was the portfolio manager while I was still in law school, making these small investments into these very, very high impact companies. Wow. And we had a fund with Ben & Jerry's. Okay, yes. Anita Roddick from The Body Shop, really cool woman. Muhammad Yunus from the Grameen Bank was on the board. He was a micro-lending godfather. And so I started to see these entrepreneurs who had vision like you do, who were changing the world, and they were being wildly financially successful. And I was backing these people, and I said, I'm in. For the rest of my life, I want to be somebody that helps and provides resources and coaches and gets to spend my time with the most brilliant people in the world who are doing really good things and help in some small way. And I've been doing that exact same for 30 years now.
So as you're into the world.
Yeah.
How did you start teaching at Howard and then University of Maryland?
Okay. So at Calvert, I convinced them, because I still had this international impulse. I convinced them to do a fund for Eastern Europe right when the wall came down, right, in the early 90s.
Yes.
And it was for energy and the environment, because there's a lot of former communist environmental issues. And so we stood up a fund to go after that, and that was sort of my brainchild. So at this point in my life, I've probably conceived of and raised probably 9 or 10 funds. So that's my entrepreneurial journey. Each one of these funds is my company that I've launched, and I'm on my about 10th one. My 5th one was New Market. The first one was with Calvert, and I convinced them to do that. So I said, let's do this. And they said, sure, if you can pull that off, let's go for it. So we raised a $60 million fund for energy and the environment for Eastern Europe. And we had a hard time doing that. So I brought in a partner, Templeton, from the Franklin Templeton Group. They had just started a private equity division, and we were their first product. So Calvert got bought out, got a little bit of an exit, and I was the only employee they kept.
Oh, wow.
And so I went off to work for Templeton, and they gave me some pretty good training for investing. They were good professional investors. I went to business school at night at that point, and moved over to Eastern Europe, first to Warsaw, and then to manage the fund in the Baltics. So I moved to Tallinn.
So you traveled Chicago, Berkeley, New York, DC, Latin America, now Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And managing my own fund, and now I'm like 27, 28 years old.
Damn.
Yeah. And I started teaching in Estonia at the business school.
Okay.
Good stories there. Like my first final, every single student cheated. Former Soviet Union, right? They all shared their answers. And so we put a whole ethics code in I said, I'm not coming back. And they accepted that we're going to do an ethics code inside this university. And then when I came back to the U.S., my wife wanted to go to graduate school. She's a social worker in the schools. Another foundation for me, right? You can imagine our conversations over the dinner table.
The stories.
It's good stuff, right? She's a big heart in the schools, helping kids, and we share that deeply. And so I came back from Eastern Europe. My wife went to University of Maryland, Baltimore to get her LCSW, and I was sitting in D.C. saying, I'm bored now. I'm not in the action of working with the entrepreneurs. I started volunteering at Howard's, got a small business development center.
Okay.
And I volunteered for somebody, Malcolm Barnes, he ran the center. And I started helping companies, inner city DC companies that Howard helped. And they said, you want to teach? And I said, hell yeah. So I taught for 2 years international business, a senior elective in the business school. And the second year I won Teacher of the Year at Howard.
Oh, congratulations.
So one of my...
how was it at, so full disclosure, I went to Lincoln, the first HBCU. Howard thinks that they're doing something. What was it at, shout out to the Bison. How was it at Howard?
It was one of my favorite experiences of my life. I learned a lot, probably more than I taught. The student body was brilliant. The student body was affluent. The student body was curious. And there was never a lack of a deep, thoughtful conversation. So the premise was international business, but and this stayed true for me through teaching all those years at Maryland too. It's an opportunity to have a discussion with students to get them thinking. And so when you're talking about international business or other things, it's a great opportunity to engage. So seniors graduating, going off into the world at Howard, they were in having a particular interest in business and international. It was ripe for amazing discussions, and no matter what we were talking about, it went off into this beautiful direction, and I think the students really enjoyed it too. So I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't familiar with an HBC. I was blown away. I was blown away.
A lot of diamonds in the rough.
They were not. It wasn't so rough.
They were.
and I'll be honest with you. And we're all getting aware of preconceptions, right? The world's getting better to be aware of preconceptions.
Yes.
I might have had some preconceptions that Howard's going to be a little rougher than it was. It's kind of interesting, and I was like, "There's nothing rough about this place. This place is well shined, beautiful. These people are going to go. They're already from families that are the most successful, and these kids are going to be amazingly successful."
So, how the transition from Howard to College Park?
We had a vision. So the woman who ran the entrepreneurship department at Howard, where I taught under, her name was Pat Saunders. She was in her 80s.
Oh, wow.
She couldn't see very well. I'm sure she's passed away by now because this was 25 years ago. Really, Pat and I fell in love with each other. Okay. And she was this beautiful woman. And she wanted to do an entrepreneurship center, a venture fund, and an incubator at Howard, and she wanted me to run it. And I had just come back from doing this overseas work, and I was volunteering in the Small Business Development Center and thinking about doing this inner city fund with Howard, entrepreneurship center, incubator, start new businesses. I was in, and we had this great vision. We wrote this whole grant up, and we didn't get it.
Oh, wow.
We didn't get the grant, and I was devastated. It was really what I wanted to do with my life next. And somebody told me, somebody from Calvert actually, a friend of mine, that Maryland was looking for somebody to do something like that. And Pat said, I'm going to lose you to Maryland. I know I am. And she was right. And I was, oh, of course not. And I went in there, and I had this vision that we put together at Howard. And I walked into the business school, and they hired me to teach, to run the entrepreneurship center, to do the incubator, to do tech transfer. It was a beautiful position. And they let me launch the first fund that became New Markets One and set up a company. And they invested in it, and we have to pass.
So you're a professor, and they help you set this up.
Yeah. And we're managing entrepreneurship center. I had 3 jobs when I had my little kids.
Wow.
I was just talking to my wife about we had 25-year anniversary, and she's like, it was real hard when kids were little.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, was it? She's like, we're thinking about it, yeah. So the Entrepreneurship Center, the Venture Fund, and Teaching. Started at Maryland in 2002.
Wow. And you've been going ever since with it.
So I retired from Maryland in 2020.
Okay.
The last 5 years, I advised the president on what we call B2B, which is how the university can work with corporations to do more certificate work, upskilling, products and services that that drive economic mobility in partnership with companies. So this opportunity, I think, to talk a little bit about the philosophy of the fund at this point. If that's
Yes.
okay?
No, I was going to ask that, is that you have all this wealth of experience, this body of knowledge, but I think it's undergirded by your experiences in all these different places. The privilege, I think, that you've kind of had to see so many different cultures, so many different circumstances, and how did you bring all that into what the philosophy of the fund now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll connect this last part, which is more recently working with the University of Maryland, as part of an evolution of what new markets evolved into, and it was simultaneous with an evolution of my kind of academic career. So new markets first started, our first fund, it was part of a program that the SBA had done that came out with the new markets tax credit. So the Clinton administration did this big economic development initiative. Most people know about these new markets tax credits for economic development of inner city. But what we did is there was a fund program as part of it. So with University of Maryland partnership, it was an inner city fund for Baltimore and DC. And the concept that we came up with was work with universities. So we worked with Hopkins and UMB and Maryland, and then Morgan State. I had somebody on the board from Morgan. And we put these universities together and said, we're going to do tech transfer and create companies. We're in the center of federal funding.
Yes.
There's so much technology development. We're going to pull them out of the universities and the labs, and we're going to start companies in the incubators, of which I managed at Maryland, right? And I worked with all the incubators, and we started companies, and it was really hard. So the first thing we have to do is do tech transfer and do the licensing with the university, negotiate getting the technology, and then we'd build the management teams, and then we syndicated, which means we brought in other investors. So if it was a healthcare deal, I brought in a really good healthcare fund. If it was environmental technology, I brought in that. And what most people don't think about when they think of tech transfer, because Hopkins does a ton of it in medical, right? That's a lot of their tech transfer. But a lot of the university produced technology is actually in education, which kind of makes sense because they're educational institutions. And what we found after our first fund is that our education investments did the best. So it was the highest performing, whether that was because it was a better fit for us as educators. At this point I consider myself an educator. Or because those had the best risk return profile, meaning some of the medical technologies do really well and some of them just, you can't get past the FDA, which I found. So for one reason or another, we started really thriving in this education focused sector. And we went to do our next fund. I went to this foundation I had met called the Lumina Foundation. And Lumina is one of the leading education foundations. And we said, would you like to be an investor in our next fund? And they said, they looked and they were smart. They said, you guys should focus on education and workforce and economic mobility. That's what you're good at. We can tell that's you are. And we'll invest in you if you focus your next fund. And so that was a good motivation for us. Then we became and have since become, so now we've done 5 funds in the education and employment space, laser focused, and it's been wonderful getting to know the sector, the great entrepreneurs, the great talent, of which we'll talk about pretty soon, the other funds that invest, the strategic partners. We have many great foundations who invested with big strategic partners like Bright Horizons and K-12 and Strayer Education. So we've been able to attract people that make us smarter. We have a 25-person advisory board in the education workforce, former college presidents, Britt Kerwin, these sorts of people, right? So now that starts building on itself, and you start to get really, really good at it. You know, it took me 30 years to get really, really good, but we're getting there. Good as board members, good at helping, good at coaching, right? And it's come together really well. And so to connect it with the end of my my academic sort of tenure, the main philosophy that motivates us as investors is the following set of data. 100 kids start high school, 85 graduate. So we've lost 15 kids. Where do they go? What happens to them? Usually around junior, senior year.
Yes.
Of the 85 kids that graduate, 56 enroll in college. Right? So now we've lost another 29 kids. Where do they go? How does the country, the educational system, the workforce sector, how do we support and provide a good landing? Of the 56 kids that enroll in college, 30 graduate. So now another 26 out there with some college, maybe some debt, right? Of the 30 that graduate college, 15 get a job that requires a bachelor's. So 15 of those kids are underemployed. And the last stat that is interesting to me is only 25% of kids who graduate college said, I got a job that I enjoy that pays me a good living. So we can be down to 5 or 10% of the country that makes it through that system in a way that's successful. And so when you start studying what happens and the problems, each solution from companies that help people graduate high school, help people persist in college, alternative vocational tracks for people who don't go into college. We have a leading prison education company for people who are incarcerated in this country, right? Your solution, your intervention. We find data-driven interventions that help improve the metrics on each one of those places that we just mentioned where kids fall through the system. And then my last years at the University of Maryland, we were looking at how to bring companies to the table to solve this problem. So all the employers are sitting back with their arms crossed saying, we can't find enough qualified people, right? Or we don't like the way people are showing up in terms of their work ethic. And there was a World Bank study that said job training programs that don't include the employer don't really work that well.
Which makes sense.
But the universities don't want the employer input. So I was working with the University of Maryland to bring the employers to the table to try and say, what curriculum, what skills do you need, what kind of programs will you help us offer? Should we do some non-degree pathways, those sorts of things?
So as you're now where we are, right? A couple salient points is from all your different experiences. Coming across just my journey as a teacher and a school administrator, you have a lot of young people, whether it be in high school or even college, that want to be entrepreneurs. What are some tangible things that you've seen across skills or qualities, attributes that you've seen across successful entrepreneurs? Like what are some things commonalities that you kind of picked up?
Definitely resilience. So people who have overcome barriers. A lot of non-traditional folks who've overcome barriers make very good entrepreneurs. So I think that's one of the most important. The second is the ability to lead people and to get people sort of inspired and fall in and come behind you. Particular skills, you notice that I didn't say them first, but they don't hurt. So sometimes they're finance skills, sometimes they're sales skills, sometimes they're operational skills, sometimes they're product skills, right? So you know a domain and you have a skill set where you can help inside the company. Besides being a visionary leader, it's nice if you can roll up your sleeves, especially on the earlier stage. Network often helps. Industry expertise often helps. But if you're going back to the spirit and the soul of it, I would say persistence and vision. Just I see it, and I'm not going to give up till I get there. I'd say that's a number one characteristic.
So one of the things that we underlying theme that I don't think I've been very conscious with, but it kind of permeates one door at a time, is just keeping it 100, as the young people say, being real, being honest, transparent, vulnerability. So in your position, you get pitched all types of ideas all the time from different companies. I still question it now, is that by the time this comes out, the press would have hit, and obviously New Markets is invested in Concentric. Why Concentric? Like, how the hell did that happen? Because I'm still trying to figure it out. So, how? And why?
Well, we are fortunate to see a little over 1,000 companies a year. Mm-hmm. And we usually invest in about 3 or 4. So, you know, you're in the top 0.03%. Mm-hmm. And we could go through sort of some business speak characteristics of what we look for, but ultimately we're looking for proven efficacy.
Okay.
So number one, you know, along those lines of where people are falling through the cracks, you know, where institutional or family or society is not there, right? And a young person's life is headed in a more challenging direction. Anybody we see that's able to step in at that point and help redirect them on a positive trajectory, right, gets our attention. And then, is there a profitable business model? You know, you've survived for how many years?
14.
14 years.
And the
right?
pandemic, the years start blending in.
Yeah. And the ability to not have grants that have supported you, not have venture capital that supported you, right? There's something fundamental to having a business. And in my world, a lot of people think we deserve to be funded by venture capital and not have to worry about making money. Where you're just the opposite. You're like, I need to survive and make sure that we make enough money so that next year we can serve more kids and we could hire more talented people. And so you've built a culture and a philosophy of a company that can survive and scale. And so independent, unlike a lot of companies that come to us where, you know, we're not going to survive unless you give us a bunch of money to cook up. You've come to us and said, I have something that works. Can you help me accelerate?
That's a good way to say it.
Right? It's proven. The efficacy is proven. The business model is proven. The beauty of the PSAs and your ability to attract these great people, young people to go help other students, right? All that stuff you spent 12 years making work. And so I don't see that often. I don't see a company that's absolutely crushing it on the impact, that's profitable year after year, that has the ability to scale and isn't dependent on us for survival, with a leader that makes me want to work with them. Somebody, actually, it's Frank Bonzel, so it's another good person to mention. I have a lot of good people in my world. So he started a firm up in Baltimore called New Enterprise Associates. So one of the best venture funds in the country started right in Baltimore, called NEA. And Frank Bonzel was a founder, and he was on my board for a long time. And his son is a fantastic education investor who worked with us for a while and helped open our eyes to the education space. And so Frank Senior said, only invest with people that when things go poorly, you're willing to roll up your sleeves and work through the night together, because things will go poorly. So you and I, we're going to hit some barriers together. We're going to have some hard times. And do you want to work with me, and do I want to work with you on a 24/7 week to solve a problem together? And is there going to be any joy and love there, or is it going to be toxic and pain? And I've been successful enough at this point where I don't need the toxic and the pain. So you're somebody that I think would give me joy to roll up my sleeves together and work through the problems that we're going to face together. And we've been able to bring in other people that I'm looking forward to doing that too.
Yes. I want to thank you and your team, for believing in something that has been a labor of love. Thank you for your consciousness. Thank you for your compassion. Thank you for your belief. And what I think will happen, and what I'm most joyous about, is the opportunity, yes, definitely to expand, but the impact that we have and the amount of students, children, communities, and families that we're going to be able to impact. And what I'm looking forward to is this new, fresh wave of talent that can actually even take Concentric to the next level. And without you and your team, that would not be possible. So we look forward to being a part of the family, the portfolio, look forward to learning from each other, growing, and just want to thank you. This is going to be a marriage, a very good and joyous marriage. And, one of the things that we talked about is what are the things and who are the people that we need to take it to the next level? The different skill sets, the skill set other than just persistence, tenacity, and resiliency, but they have the tangible skills, the business acumen to ask the right questions, as Dr. Rabowski always asks. And, we have the opportunity to bring in our new chief operating officer, a son of Baltimore. I had my questions at first because I'm like, who is this guy from affluent school? But he got street cred with him on east side of Baltimore. And, we're going to bring in, and this is like a 2-part series. So the audience is getting a treat, not only with you, but with our next guest. So I just really want to thank you for believing in us and supporting us and getting us to the next level. I appreciate you, Mark, so much.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve, because as you get older, you realize true happiness comes when you can serve. Mm-hmm. And you have provided not only me, but also Karlo the opportunity to come in and be of real service. And that's what's the most fulfilling, important thing. And so you've created that opportunity for both of us. And I also want to thank Karlo for taking a risk and joining us and coming to serve with us.
Welcome back to One Door at a Time, Concentric Educational Solutions podcast. We left off talking about the investment, the partnership between New Markets and Concentric, and how it's going to allow us to grow and impact and work with more students. And one of the great things about that is that we'll be able to bring in, and we have brought in new talent and people who will help us grow. And when we were thinking about this, and I was having a conversation with Mark, and Mark was having a conversation with me, we were very intentional about the person or the people that we had to bring in, that they had to have the qualities that would not only help us grow, but really address and work with the students that we work with. And when I had the opportunity to meet this brother, when we had lunch together, I knew, I really knew. And I never would have thought from our first initial conversation that you had the background, the story, and really caring about it. So, and I want to welcome not just to the podcast, but to the team, Mr. Karlo Young, East Side bred.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I really actually think he got some West Side tendencies in him around Pimlico. But man, thank you for joining the team.
Yeah.
You're not a co-worker, you're a brother.
Likewise.
Yeah, I know we're gonna do some terrific things together. But talk to, share with, like, how does a brother from East Side make it to where you made it from, and then taking that huge step to come back?
Yeah.
To be more.
It's excited to be here at Concentric. David, you heard my story. Grew up in East Baltimore, went to public school the first 8 years of my life, Roland Park Public, just go Rams. And true story, ended up having a chance to go to Gilman School. Uh-huh. And I walked by Gilman. For those who know the Baltimore landscape, Roland Park Public and Gilman share a fence. They're literally next to each other.
Yes, you're right.
And I walked by the school, Gilman, for 8 years. From first grade through 8th grade to catch the bus to go home.
What was that?
44 East, just for those who know the landscape, and never thought that was an attainable option. As I was entering 8th grade and started to look at high schools, thought I would end up at Poly or City or Dunbar, kind of here in Baltimore. Yeah. And the reality is, one day I was called out of class, and they said they want to take 8 Black, young men from Roland Park over to visit Gilman. Gilman's an all-boys private school, for those who don't know the Baltimore.
Very prestigious.
Very prestigious. Yeah. And we entered the school and took a tour, and we walked out of that school, 8 of us saying, we're all going to apply. We're all going to apply. I was the only one that followed through. And I went home, talked to my parents, and said, "Hey, I want to go to Gilman." They said, "How much does it cost?" They said, "No." And the next day, my mom came back to me and she said, "Hey, how serious are you about Gilman?" I said, "I'm, dead serious. I want to go." And she called the school, and there's a legendary gentleman at Gilman, for anybody that knows, former Baltimore City teacher, the first black employee, faculty member hired by Gilman. There's a guy named Bill Green. And he's a legend. He's the only black portrait in the entire campus. And Mr. Green has a whole generation of black young men that have come through Gilman under, kind of the wings of Mr. Bill Green. He called my mom and said, "Hey, well, how serious are you about your son coming?" And my mom said, "Well, my son's dead serious." And he says, "Well, the reason I ask is tomorrow is the last entrance exam. This is long before the ICT kind of standardized tests. Gilman had their own tests." My mom said, "We'll be there." I show up, take the test, and before I get home, we actually walked home. In Gilman's in a nice neighborhood. We walked outside of that and walked home. And before we got in the door, this is back in the days of tape cassette answer machines. My mom plays the answer machine, and it's Mr. Green on the answer machine saying, "Ms. Young, we want your son." And
good test scores.
That changed. Yeah, I had Concentric tutor. I didn't even. So that changed my life. But I always say I'm grounded in both. Right. If I didn't have Roland Park, I would not have been successful kind of at Gilman. If I just went to private school, I don't think my life would have been the same. Having both and growing up in the community I had is what built my kind of resiliency, if you will, and being kind of step into this new environment and learn at the age of 14 and 15 how to adjust and navigate kind of a new environment, if you will. Off from there, I went to Drexel University, but I knew even in Philadelphia, and I shared the story with you, I was spending time in some of the, through junior achievement. I was spending time junior achievement.
Trio program.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm a student at Drexel University, and it was important to me to be out in the city schools kind of in Philadelphia. So I'm catching the L, catching the bus to get to, go teach 4th and 5th graders, and then getting back to class, getting back to campus, I can go to class. But it's always been a passion. I live by a motto, lifting as we climb. From former Baltimore chapter president of NABA, National Association of Black Accountants. That's NABA's motto, but it's always been my motto even before I got to that level. When I was graduating from Philadelphia, I knew there was either a chance I was going to New York, staying in Philly, or coming to Baltimore. But something in me was like, you need to come back home, if you will. And part of that story of come back home was that a lot of black men leave the city. If you've made it out, if you haven't been, incarcerated, if you, haven't been, kind of harmed or, deceased, if you will, you leave and you keep on going. Right? You get out of the city, you keep on going. It was important to come back and do work in this community. So it's always been close and near and dear to my heart to be back here and doing the work. As you know, I run a program called Jabali, the Gilman Black Alumni Leadership Institute, co-founded with a few of my brothers from Gilman. That program was designed for Mr. Green, the gentleman that I mentioned. He was the leader of Upward Bound at Gilman. And that was the strongest chapter. And we would have, a bunch of friends of mine who went to public school would come to Gilman's campus, and I'd be in the office, I'd be tutoring, etc. And when Mr. Green retired, there wasn't that presence at Gilman. So my buddies and I were like, hey, we need to bring that presence back and have students from all over the city come into Gilman so they can get access to this. Because I would remember for 8 years, I walked by this campus that didn't have access to that. So it's always been important that even as I was a student, how do you think about bringing access back? So for Jabali, we are now in year 19. And this program is really focused around leadership, but really exposure. I think I shared a quote, access, talent is equally distributed, but access is not. So how do we unlock access for people? That's always been at the core of what I do. I grew up, kind of professionally, worked at large firms like Deloitte in consulting, and then went into investment banking doing, M&A, merger acquisition, primarily in software and in education. So did a number of deals kind of in the education space. I was like, there's a lot happening kind of in the middle market, if you will, relative to like unlocking education. Went back to business school at the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. Chi-Town, it's a great place. Both spent time up in Evanston, but also spent time in the city. Family in the South Side, so spent a lot of time kind of in the city as well. And in took that and launched into 2U. So that's the company where I'm coming from. Been there for the past 7 years and really helping to unlock, this notion of opportunity within at the college level, higher ed specifically, across degrees, executive education programs. Vice President, General Manager, then got promoted to Senior Vice President and Portfolio General Manager, leading a portfolio of our partners and P&L kind of here in the US, but also running our entire UK portfolio. So schools like Cambridge and Oxford, London School of Economics, but also here in the US, schools like Morehouse College. I launched as the inaugural kind of general manager running our Morehouse College program. That's an undergraduate degree completion program. So in this country, there are more than 3.5 million black men that have some college credit and no degree. And really, how do you think about going after that population to make sure that those folks have an opportunity? I think, Mark was sharing a little bit earlier about the statistics of, even if you go to college, that doesn't mean you finish.
So in that role, you were really trying to re-engage them.
Re-engage, right? So these are stop-outs, dropouts, if you will. Both Morehouse College, so folks that you went to Lincoln, that people show up at homecoming that didn't finish their degree or whatever. So they
happened to you?
Hey, I'm a Lincoln alumni.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of my brothers, Morehouse brothers, who who didn't finish, but there's also many other black men across this country who haven't had that experience as well. So how do you create that opportunity for both the former Morehouse students that stopped out, as well as brothers that went to the institutions you and I went to, who were sitting next to the left of us or right of us? How do we create that? So getting to the mission has always been important to me, and doing that in having the career that I've had and being able to be impacting Baltimore City while impacting kind of the world at the same time has been very important to me. And then when I got the call relative to from New Markets relative to Concentric, I was like, the mission captured me, and then sitting down with Mark, and then when I eventually met you, that captured me. I don't think I told you this. Not only was I impressed by you, but when you had me meet the team, our team back at the office, man, and I met some of our PSAs, the folks on the front line.
It's a different vibe.
It's a different vibe. This is these people are here for the mission.
Yes.
And they're talented and they're hungry, and that, so it's great to have, the senior team is great, and you have the double bottom line venture capital firm who's kind of engaged and wants to be a great partner to us. When I met the team, it was really solidified that there's something really special here. And I saw the same thing that the New Markets kind of a team saw as well. Yeah.
So where do you think, because 2 years is highly successful.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Concentric, we're going to be national and we're going to be international, but, really centered in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Where do you see Concentric going?
Yeah. So
right? Because I know I've had a vision for 14 years, but opening it up, where do you see it going?
Yeah. So, I'm in the business of scale, right? Scale, but from a quality standpoint, right?
Yes.
And that means quality in both the product and the impact we're making, but also in the team that you're building, and getting people galvanized kind of around the mission, the vision, the values that we're going to uphold. How do we deliver, impact to these individual? Like, what I love about the solution today is we're talking about individualized attention, right, if you will. A quick, kind of aside is there's this basketball player, I don't know if you've heard of him. He plays with Golden State Warriors. This guy named Steph Curry.
Oh yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So
another light-skinned brother.
Steph Curry. You talk about kind of evolution. You talk about evolution. And what did Steph Curry do to the game? What did he?
He expanded the three-point line.
Right? So a three-point line, right?
Yep.
It's a major shot in basketball, and a lot of people think about that three-point shot. And you got to think about it. There's a 2-point shot and a 3-point shot. 3 points is, I don't think people will understand. People think it's 1 point high. It is a very high percentage more, right? 150% more relative to a 2-point shot versus a 3-point shot. And so a lot of people will galvanize and look at that, and they're waiting for that 3-point shot. Steph Curry shoots about 43% from the 3-point line. On any given season, Steph Curry shoots 60% from within the 2-point range. And a lot of people are excited about Steph Curry relative to his 3-point shooting. And what I would always argue is like the inside game is what gets it done. If you will. You need the three, you need the evolution of the 3-point shot, but the inside game is what our kids and our students need. So how do you actually build the right wraparound services and supports, and just having somebody that shows up at my door on a home visit and they care about me, that changes the trajectory. Like we can do a lot of outside things. We can throw a lot of services over the fence and say, hey, good luck, if you will. But I think what Concentric's been really good at is that inside game, right? And I think what we're building is going to both evolve the inside game and add some outside game to it. So you think about kind of the growth is both in product, if you will, but also, in many ways, we are operating really strong regionally today. And this is a problem. This is a global problem, right? There's only a couple countries that do chronic absenteeism really well. Singapore, Finland. When I was leaving, kind of making the transition out of you had some colleagues from the UK. It was like persistent absentee. Karl, I love what you're about to do. Persistent absenteeism is a major problem here. Right, kind of.
Am I hearing Concentric in London?
Hey, I'm ready to go. Southwest doesn't fly there yet, but but we're gonna make that happen. But this is a national problem. But when I think about, and you asked 2 years, I think there's expansion both in the product set, but also kind of in geographic, but strategically, right? We have to figure out what are the right markets we don't play in. Clearly we can look at any urban district and know this is a problem, but there are rural districts where this is an issue.
Yes, it is.
And we have to think about where are we going to solve the pain, where are we going to grow relative to, kind of what makes sense for Concentric, but what makes sense for, kind of the students and families and schools that we want to impact as well. We have a team that are in different, kind of geos today, and like how do we think about leveraging those particular geos, and then working alongside with our partners at New Markets to think about, kind of where are the right prioritized locations that we want to address, and what are the product innovations we want to drive to go along with supporting these students.
Because what COVID opened everyone's eyes up to seeing is that whether it be chronic absenteeism, mental health services, whatever the case may be, that this plethora of issues is not a social economic nor is it racially specific. It's across the board. Like people are experiencing this globally, right? Being from Baltimore, a son of Baltimore, what does this personally mean to you to be able to do this?
This is, my journey has always been about kind of how do I mix, kind of vocation and avocation, if you will, and kind of get into that synergy. Part of the reason why I moved my career towards education and so passionate about it, to fill my cup is kind of the main thing and to make impact. However, the fact that this was in my backyard, I didn't know Concentric. As much as I spent time in education, I did not know Concentric. So when this got introduced to me, and to know this is my backyard, come to the office and have walked all the streets around the office, to walk every school we've talked about in really in our Maryland corridor, but certainly even in Michigan and other geos that we're in. When I hear the school, I know the schools. I walked to all these places. I got friends that went to all these places. I've walked the streets of these places. The home visits, when you were talking about, hey, we're going to go do home visits on this particular street, I know that street, right?
Damn, CERN,
That's right.
So we're on Dunbar, okay.
That is, my mom grew up in Lafayette Courts Housing Project. My dad grew up from Preston and Milton. So to come from where I come from, my parents, I'll just quickly aside, is that they did not finish college. My mom and dad both grew up on the east side, met at Forest Park on the west side.
Forest Park, okay. My first teaching job.
That's right. They started dating at 16, got pregnant at 16, and then had my brother at 17, and they got married, and they've been married ever since. That story doesn't happen. They did not finish college, but they were very specific about my brother and I focusing on education. Okay. So when I think about kind of what we're unlocking there, one of the things that they taught me early on, you talk about kind of the relatability, if you will, is like, hey, we may not have gone to college, but my parents have a PhD in common sense and street smarts. And they have passed that on to us. They focus on clearly the school-wide education and read books and know your math, but also drive, kind of, and be a good citizen, if you will. So to be able to do this in my backyard is a dream come true.
I look forward to the brotherhood. I look forward to the journey. I look forward to the grind. The grind is always real. I look forward to sharing the success, because the more successful we are is an indication how much more successful students will be, about consciously giving back. So welcome to the team. Welcome to the family. Let's go get it.
Let's go.
We're part of the Loop, Light Skin United. The brothers are coming back from the early 90s.
That's right.
Christopher Williams, Al B. Shore.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Now we're in 2023. So Karlo will be a frequent guest. Hell, Karlo, you're going to be a host. You didn't know this, but you'll end up being a host of One Door at a Time, so I can get a break, my sabbatical. But I want to thank everybody for joining in again, One Door at a Time. As usual, and always, you can catch us, concentric.world. I think I got this down. All of our platforms. Shout out to the Atlas Group, our sponsor.
Yes.
28 locations around the Baltimore area. They're in Houston, DC, Philadelphia now, Miami. Always thank you to the Atlas Group for supporting us. Catch us next time, One Door at a Time. Keep it real.
Let's go.